Putin carried out a terrorist strike, another act of terror against Ukraine. Currently in Kyiv, they are clearing the debris of residential buildings that were destroyed. At the same time, there was an explosion in Yelabuga, in Tatarstan, significantly damaging, almost destroying the Shahid production plant. And there was a fire in Moscow City. And Trump demands Ukraine's capitulation. Is that so? About this and more right now. Welcome, friends, to my channel. I am Alexander Muzienko. And on this day, April 24th, now Thursday, a traditional briefing for you on those events that I consider relevant, important, and worthy of your esteemed attention. So, on the night of April 23rd to 24, Russia launched a combined missile and drone strike on Ukraine. The Ukrainian cities of Kharkiv and Kyiv were under attack. In Kyiv, at this very moment, while I am recording this video for you, this briefing is ongoing. The clearing of the rubble of a residential building is underway, where, for example, there are fatalities and a large number of injured. My sincere condolences to the families and loved ones. Another act of terror. After the Ukrainian cities, we see that the Ukrainian capital is also being deliberately targeted by the enemy. They are targeting residential buildings. This is a deliberate attempt to force Ukraine into capitulation by Russia, and what Putin is doing is blatant terrorism in front of the whole world. And undoubtedly, such behavior must only be condemned, pressured, and sanctioned. There can be no other interpretations of this story. What mistakes might be perceived now by someone in the White House due to someone misfiring rockets and so on? We have the facts, and these facts are seen by the whole world, and these facts cannot be interpreted any other way than as blatant acts of terror. And those who want to appease terrorism, they look like accomplices of terrorism, cowardly weaklings. They cannot be called anything else. No matter what wealth they have or what positions they hold, even in the USA or in any other country, today it does not matter at all. There are two categories. There are situations where you cannot be in the middle and say, as the Russians like to say, or as some have started to say in the USA, that not everything is so clear-cut. Everything is clear-cut. Perhaps it's not clear-cut for Vidkov, who is eager, dreams of rushing to Putin for another meeting in the Kremlin. But it is absolutely clear-cut for all people of goodwill, of whom I am convinced there are significantly more in the world, in European countries, and in the USA. Those true friends of ours who have supported and continue to support Ukraine. In word, in deed, in action. I believe it will continue to be so, and that terror will not succeed. I always say that evil, very aggressive evil, makes a lot of noise. Evil creates a lot. Let's say, such manipulative influences, and evil always tries to demonstrate that it is winning. But in the end it loses. And I am convinced that it will continue to be so, and despite the pressure that has now united against us, Russia with missiles, and the US, the acting administration, with political and diplomatic pressure, it is not excluded that other methods will be used in the future, judging by President Trump's statements. But despite this, Ukraine still resists. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky appears firm and consistent in his decisions, a true tough nut and a genuine European leader. You may have different opinions about the head of the Ukrainian state, and there can absolutely be various political preferences, which is a normal right in a democratic country. But during wartime, there are exceptions. Because we must be consolidated, united, and unified in our drive to defend and preserve our nation, our Ukrainian people. And I urge everyone to do this, all Ukrainians, wherever we are in the world. We must unite. For us, this is a fundamentally important issue of our people's survival. We feel this ourselves. For those who do not feel it themselves, who are somewhere far away and think that we can just cease fire now, stop resisting, surrender to Russia, and negotiate with Putin about the economy. By the way, the economy. For the right-wing forces, when the right-wing forces start, which is strange, the Republican Party, these are right-wing forces, right conservative. Some are actually labeled as libertarians. When they start talking about the economy, it all smacks of Marxism in their statements, because it resembles materialism in its worst sense. When is the economy defined by the superstructure? Politics? This, dear friends, has nothing to do with right-wing ideologies. This is leftism, and specifically populist leftism. Perhaps it is precisely because of this that billionaire Elon Musk argues with US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent right in the White House. And then both of them talk about it and confirm it to the American publication Axios. They say, yes, we are arguing. We are arguing about the fact that the economic policy is incorrect, as believed by Musk. And Bessent, the one who visited Kyiv and thought he could pressure the Ukrainian government to sign, as they say, an agreement on rare earth metals and minerals. But regarding the agreement, there will be clear discussions and continuation of the dialogue. The Prime Minister of Ukraine, Denis Shmyhal, is currently working in the USA these days in order to ensure that the terms of this agreement are acceptable. And therefore, returning to consolidation, we all need to step out and make our voices heard in any way possible, on social media, in the streets, everywhere, in front of American embassies, so that it is visible, it is heard, so that it is clearly understood, that we are defending ourselves and protecting what is ours. What happened, particularly in London, and what President Trump later described on his network, on the social platform Truth Social, and what he mentioned at the White House, claiming that he already has some agreements with Putin, which indicates that there is some secret diplomacy going on, and Trump is trying to understand Putin. Even the US Secretary of State Rubio is also trying to understand him, looking for ways to do so, stating in an interview that, well, now we supposedly better understand Russia's position. What is there to understand? Understand that you understand the campaign of terror, campaigns of violating international law, destruction of the world order, threats to the United States of America and their national security? Well, you have to figure it out, delve into it, and find the connection. How does this happen? That the Houthis in Yemen, against whom the United States is currently fighting and can't do anything? Well, the United States can't defeat the Houthis right now. We see it like this. When they are fighting against the Houthis, where do the Houthis get the weapons to shoot down reapers? The Americans have already counted, according to CNN, citing sources in official circles of the United States. Currently, about 6 such reapers have been shot down, each costing $30 million, totaling $180 million. Well, I mean, that's money, so who is shooting them down? I assume they are being shot down with Russian weapons that are going through Iran. Iran has become a strategic partner and ally of Russia, officially at the level of agreements. And through Iran, Russian weapons are being sent which help the Houthis to fight against the USA. These are not threats. Why were sanctions imposed by the USA a few weeks ago against Russian citizens, linked to financing terrorism and cooperating with Iran, specifically regarding weapons and their supply? On suspicion that they are helping and transferring weapons. Isn't that the reason? Yes, these are also threats to the USA. And there are actually many such threats. Has President Trump forgotten about the videos released a few weeks ago, arguing why the USA should increase its presence in Greenland? They relate to the fact why this needs to be done. Because there are threats from Russia and China, not just from China. And from Russia as well. These are obvious facts. And it's clear that the shifting of Russia's position, for example, in occupied Crimea, the placement of nuclear weapons, missiles there, and similar actions pose threats to the entire southern flank of NATO and the allies and partners of the USA in the region. That Russia, moving towards the southern seas, the warm seas, as it was defined since the times of Peter I, continues its neo-imperial policy, aggressive, chauvinistic, aimed at the genocide of subjugated peoples, at their enslavement. So, it is clear that since those times, essentially, the discussion was about the need to increase dominance in the southern seas. And it is obvious that these are threats. Therefore, strategically, Russia is an adversary of the USA. This has been the case under various governments, regardless of the political orientation, whether Republican or Democrat. That's why they pursued the corresponding policy. This should also be remembered. That's where the issue lies. But, in fact, returning to what actually happened, and what happened is that we see Donald Trump increasingly using elements of pressure. There are already open statements from the White House that they are not satisfied with Ukraine's position in the negotiations, claiming that Ukraine is moving in the wrong direction. And Trump is supposedly justifying himself on social media. He insists that he did not mean recognize Crimea as Russian from Ukraine, but rather hinting that the US might do so. To which Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky responded by publishing a declaration on social media X stating that the US will never recognize Crimea as Russian, dated 2018, by the way, at a time when Donald Trump was the 45th President of the United States, and Mike Pompeo was the Secretary of State who supported this declaration. Therefore, when we talk about consistency, and when the US President likes to engage in historical assessments, here is a well-argued historical position that clearly defines why the US should not recognize Crimea as Russian. However, the pressure that exists is noticeable. The fact that the American delegation did not come to London, the statements made by Rubio, J. Vance, and ultimately Trump, and then what Trump said in the White House about already having agreements with Putin. Likely there are some conspiracies going on through secret channels with the Russian dictator by the American president. It is unlikely that after this he can be fully called the leader of the free world. Unfortunately, because in my understanding and perception, the leader of the free world cannot conspire with terrorists. This simply must be excluded. And now pressure must be applied on Ukraine. And is Ukraine consistent? Fundamentally, no. We do not surrender territories. No, we continue the fight. Interestingly, Donald Trump noted on the social network Truth Social that it is possible to fight for another 3 years. He acknowledges and points out that the capability for resistance by official Kyiv is determined by a 3-year period. This, in fact, is also an interesting point that we see as of now. As for how long Russia can continue, there is indeed a question, but Putin is furious. He sees that the USA cannot pressure Ukraine despite the statements being made and the diplomatic démarches. He, on his part, is applying pressure by launching missile and drone strikes, trying to weaken Ukraine's will to resist, attempting to inflict as many losses and destruction as possible. This is what's happening. This, in fact, is quite indicative and has signs of a conspiracy. Despite this, Ukraine is behaving absolutely constructively. Let's take a look. An absolutely consistent position. Let's talk about a ceasefire as proposed by the USA. This was not invented by Ukraine. This was proposed by our partners, to which we agreed during the meeting of the Ukrainian-American delegation in Saudi Arabia. It was agreed upon there. And so, let's argue again. Because talking about what we can discuss now, the issue further, rather than about a ceasefire, it is to indulge Russian positions, because it was Lavrov and Putin who previously stated that even if they engage in negotiations, it does not mean that Russia will cease fire. And so, if we do not achieve a ceasefire and continue moving forward on some negotiation points, it clearly means, well, essentially, playing along with the Kremlin's conditions, which is absolutely unacceptable. And we all need to understand this very well. The next thing to understand is that, of course, in this situation, we need Europe, and Europe should be our support. Will it be so? I will tell you frankly, I am not yet certain. Because there are now publications appearing in Aden. Financial Times reports that supposedly both Britain, France, and Germany are starting to look for pressure tools. They are very afraid that the USA will withdraw from the negotiations. Well, Europe is weak, and right now the only leadership in Europe is Ukraine. No matter what, Ukraine is a European leader, and to preserve its integrity and values, Europe should unite around Ukraine. This is already clear. In light of the statements, especially from the head of the Pentagon, the US Secretary of Defense, Putin's Hexet, I think it's quite obvious. And Hexet said that the USA can no longer act to 100% extent as security guarantors for Europe. Well, yes, it's obvious we need to unite around this. Today, the guarantor of Europe's security is Ukraine itself. And those politicians who understand this continue to support Ukraine. But it's important that Europe does not betray us. It's important for Europe to remain, because now we will see what the position of the United States will be. So far, it is also unclear. We hear many statements, these are elements of pressure. We see that someone is rushing to meet with Putin. This is all happening, it's all clearly noticeable. But what actions will be taken is not yet determined. It's hard to predict. That is, we do not currently see statements from Trump saying that the United States is ready to stop aid to Ukraine, to cease economic and financial support, and so on. Still, from what is happening, it is currently about the level of statements. But obviously such trends are emerging, so it is important for us to maintain the European position. And it is important that politicians in the United States, the Democrats, other opposition members have shown support for Ukraine and criticized the current administration's position. In order to adjust this position so that the ratings begin to influence it, this is also what is crucial for us right now. And then the negotiation process continues. The USA talks, threatens, and blackmails, but they have not exited this negotiation process, which is also noticeable and worth understanding. Meanwhile, the President of Ukraine, the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, Volodymyr Zelensky, will visit the Republic of South Africa with the First Lady. He will have talks with the President there, securing the support of the Global South. And as far as I understand, from there he will go directly to the Vatican for the funeral procession of the Pope, which will take place on April 26th. On Saturday, US President Donald Trump said that he will have meetings. After this, following the packing, a ceremony when he will be there in the Vatican will take place in Rome. You see, as I predicted, but he didn't say anything about whether there will be a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, possibly a no. Well, that is in line with the trend that perhaps Trump might be afraid won't have anything to say here either, and we need to understand this through certain subjective factors. Well, we'll see. Meanwhile, Ukraine's defense forces, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, confirmed the strike on a Shahed-type drone manufacturing facility in Alabuga, Tatarstan, over 1,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian-Russian border. This is truly a success, and we see that Ukraine is taking action, and deep strikes continue. There was a serious, large-scale fire in Moscow City. I want to remind you that recently, Russian propagandists showed on television, and RIA Novosti broadcasted how drone strikes on Ukraine are directed from Moscow City. And the Arsenal Grau, located 60 kilometers from Moscow, where there was a significant amount of missiles and other means of destruction, is still burning. We have the means to respond, we have the capabilities, we have the army and the Ukrainian people ready to resist, and that is the most important thing. Take care of yourselves, and glory to Ukraine.